Welcome back, ID60. So, this week we have a very large topic. And once again, there is a whole class that's dedicated to materials and finishes and how we specify them for our trades to get them installed in the home. And even in that class, there's too much information. So I always start that class off by saying, you're never going to know everything there is to know about materials. Really, what this class is for is to give you enough information so that you can really ask good and intelligent questions. So with that being said, that's like how I start a whole semester worth of materials information. So just to give you guys one lecture, was a struggle. It's like, what am I going to tell them? What am I going to leave out? So just so you know, this is really a very, very minor fraction of all of the information that you could get on materials. And I try to keep it mostly to visual ideas as opposed to performance and all of that. So, with that being said, this lecture is probably a little bit longer than the others, so I've divided it into two parts. So just make sure you're watching both parts, and then there's still just one quiz and one set of notes and all of that stuff. But in terms of listening and talking, I broke it up into two pieces. So let's get started. So again, we are talking about materials. So what types of materials we use in staging, versus styling. And so the four sort of topics I narrowed it down to are paint, wallpaper, flooring, and window treatments. So first one, paint. So the importance of paint selection, specifically for a staged environment, sort of like we said in every other lecture before this one, is that it really most likely should be a neutral tone. So warmth, sort of neutral for the canvas of the space. So when you're selecting paint, one of the decisions you'll need to make is about finish. And so paint comes in about 5 finishes, and each vendor may be slightly different and they'll have a different name. But for the base, the shiniest of the finishes is a gloss. Then it's sort of a step down and it goes to a semi-gloss. And typically semi-gloss is what we see on door trims and moldings. And that's because people touch them a lot. So it's when there's a gloss, when there's a shine, it's easier to wipe off and get clean. So anything that is a space that is going to get dirty, like a trim, should probably be in a semi-gloss. A gloss is usually very shiny. It tends to be used on cabinetry, but you need to make sure that the surface is primed and very, very flat because a gloss will show all of those imperfections, any bumps, lumps, etc. Satin is one step under a semi-gloss, and it can be used on walls where you don't really want a glossy finish. You want something that looks more like a matte, but you want it to be washable. So this could be a kid's room. This could be a dining room. So it wants to give the feel of a matte, but wants to be cleanable. I'm sorry, I'm jumping back, but semi-gloss also is used in kitchens and bathrooms where there's either humidity or there is going to be a lot of cleanup. If you're, a chef and you're splashing food all over the walls, semi-gloss is where you want to go in order to get it to be cleanable. And then we have eggshell. So eggshell is a step above matte. So it looks pretty flat. It is kind of I wouldn't say you could rub it too hard. Some of the color might start coming off, but eggshell is typically what people will put on like a living room wall. It has very little shine, but you can do a little touch of clean. And then there's matte, and matte absorbs all the light. So there's no reflection, there's no shine. If you have a wall where you're trying to hide imperfections, matte is the way to go. So typically in residential, in the spaces other than bathroom and kitchen, it's usually an eggshell on the wall. If it needs to be washable, like in a kid's room, it would be a satin. On the trim, it's typically a semi-gloss, and that's so it's can be wiped down. And in materials, this is sort of the standard we learn. But then once you get into bigger ideas, all of these rules are sort of meant to be broken. So just know I'm telling you what the basic rules are. It doesn't always, always, always have to be. So, I have to admit, I Googled this and I was like, if I'm going to give them recommendations for paint colors when they are choosing to paint interior for staging, which may happen, like if the homeowner is selling the house and it hasn't been painted in a few years and it's dirty, probably want to paint before you put it on the market. And it kind of came up with exactly what we've been talking about the whole class so far. So warm whites and off whites, basically, right? And that helps you make the space look more vibrant, makes it look larger. Or they gave me like a light grayish, which is interesting. It's like a beige/gray color. So it's right in between beige and gray. So they're calling it grayish. And a warm beige. So not quite white, but it's probably giving the room a little bit more of a cozy feel. And then a light gray, which would be a little bit more modern. So must admit, I Googled those. I didn't come up with those myself, but if you are looking for paint colors that are recommended for staging, you can kind of take note of this screen. But as we see by the color palette, they're all kind of the same. If you want to do accent colors, again, for staging, you're really wanting to veer away from anything that personalizes the space. Like not everybody likes pink or not everybody likes blue. So when you're selecting these sort of accent colors, they still want to stay relatively neutral. So sea salt, which is sort of like a light sagey green, sort of a dark gray green, or they have this muted sage. So and again, I Googled this as a recommendation, and this is what it came up with. So they're all sort of in the green family, but very muted, very toned. And again, there are no hard and fast rules. If you do research, on the surrounding areas and it's by the ocean, so blue is the color, then the research trumps what Mr. Google says, or designer Google. So exterior paint colors. So you tend to want to limit your exterior paint colors to 3, and that counts the architectural elements. So if there's a brick that's red, that counts. If there's stone that's sort of a beigey, that counts as a color. So if you have those architectural elements, you may want to match one of your paint tones to that so that you also can have 3 tones of paint on your house to garner some excitement or interest. I like this house, and we're going to say that this step is sort of an architectural color, but what they've done is they've pulled that color into the trim. The body of the house is sort of this gray blue color, and then the door is a red accent. So there's 3 colors, including the architectural elements. So when you want to create contrast, you can do a lighter trim and a darker body. You want to make sure that you're camouflaging anything that's unattractive. One of the things that I've noticed, and so I am not a real estate agent by any means. I do not know the industry very well at all. But since I started looking into staging and creating this class, I've really been going to open houses and looking at homes that are for sale. And one of the things that strikes me is I've seen houses that have bars on the window, and they always paint the bars the accent color. And that doesn't make sense to me because you don't really want those to stand out. They may be necessary, but you want them to sort of pull back. They're not a highlight, they're not a feature. So you want to make sure that anything that's not a feature, like gutters or something that's unattractive on the house, recedes back. Usually that's with a darker color. So if there's a beautiful feature, then that can be the whiter or the lighter color. Um, Geography. So when we're looking at the home, we also want to take into account what's happening around it. So a lot of times you may want your house to sort of meld in with the surrounding areas, or you'll want it to stand out. So light colors tend to expand and make a space stand out, whereas darker colors recede and help it blend in. Um, Intense sun does fade colors. So there, you want to make sure that you're not doing anything that, within a year is going to fade, especially on one side where it's getting more of the sun. Um, you want to make sure that you are sort of enhancing the features of the house. So if there's something that is more valuable, you're helping it stand out by giving it either that accent color or a color that recedes and brings it forward. So symmetry allows for stronger contrast. So if you have a house that's symmetrical, it's easier to do like a black and a white, or something that's a strong contrast. If it's asymmetrical, then it lends itself to do something that doesn't have as much contrast. Black houses. So and again, this is sort of my opinion. I feel black houses are currently very popular and trendy. Um, when you are putting a house up for sale, I sort of feel like you should stay away from trends. But with that being said, I've seen a lot of black houses up for sale. Um, and they're beautiful. I love them. I think there are some pros. Like if you're in an area where there are no black houses, it's, sort of a neighborhood where all the houses are the typical light, bright colors, and you have a dark house, it's going to stand out. It's going to look special. So it has a nice visual impact. When you paint a house black, it tends to make it look more modern. It also hides a lot of the flaws because there's a lot of shade that's happening. Some of the cons, I don't know if anyone has ever owned a black car versus a white car, but when you get in a black car, it is hot. It gets hot. It's really, really, really hot. And that's because the sun is absorbing into the black color. Same thing for a house. So it's going to up your air conditioning bill in the summer. It may hold heat in the winter, but it definitely will be a hotter house during the summer. I think it is a trend. So I think eventually, once this trend goes away, it will make your house look dated. Also, when you decide it's time to paint it, it's going to be rough. There's going to be a lot of primer. There's going to be a lot of coats of paint to cover up that super dark color. So there are pros and cons. Again, it's sort of up to you and your client as to whether or not this is an approach you want to take in order to garner attention on the market. So, paint colors for styling. Kind of like we've said in all the other lectures, the sky is the limit, right? So, you're actually looking at your client's personality and what their tastes are and just sort of going for it. So, of course, I picked the brightest spaces I could that had these sort of bold, rich hues. And you know, I love a Victorian house. Wallpaper. So wallpaper in staging may not be always the best unless it's pretty neutral. Wallpapers will tend to age your space. So I try to pull sort of a wallpaper that's looked a little older. Not sure if I did a good job. I don't mind this wallpaper actually. But typically, like if you bought a wallpaper and it stays up for 20 years, it's time. So you don't really want to present a wallpaper because it does date the space. And again, with that being said, I really like this. I think it's pretty, but I think it also is very specific. So, you know, if there are people who are not particularly into flowers, this would not be a wallpaper that they would enjoy, and it may be a rejection, right? So you want to, if you're doing it for staging, you want to make sure it's pretty neutral. You don't necessarily need to do a whole wall. A time when wallpaper really might be helpful in staging if you have a wall that is severely damaged and your client is not wanting to pay to have it repaired. Wallpaper will cover that. If you're doing wallpaper, you want to make sure that it's neutral. So it can be grass cloths or vinyls that sort of look like grass cloths, natural and neutral textures. So then it adds a lot of depth and it adds a lot of warmth to the space. Peel and stick wallpapers are popular right now. And in high-end homes, they do use a lot of wallpapers when staging. And with all that being said, wallpapers tend to be, again, very personal and work with styling, but not necessarily staging. So even though I kind of like these spaces, they are not neutral. So this is very much a point of view in terms of design. So I have the roses in this small powder room. Again, I like it, but maybe not for staging. When you're seeing wallpapers on ceilings, it can add a really dramatic flair, but not everybody wants a blue checkerboard with the matching skirt. And then, of course, the book wallpaper. So dark prints tend to make rooms look smaller. Of course, peeling wallpaper should be removed. So when you're in a staging situation, how do you sort of handle wallpaper? So for sure, in a case by case evaluation, if the client already has wallpaper, you're looking at, is it current? Is it in good condition? If it is, then by all means keep it. You want to make sure again that you're keeping the paint and the wallpaper neutral. When you're layering on top of wallpaper, this is a good comment. You need to make sure that the two things are not fighting. So if you have a big print that's a wallpaper, you don't want probably to put another big print on top of it. You want to put art that is more neutral and maybe even abstract. So flowers on top of flowers don't always work. And then you want to make sure you're highlighting the positives. So do the design features work with the wallpaper? So market trends and best practices. Wallpaper is back in design trends. Again, especially the peel and stick. It does add a lot of texture. It can add a lot of character if that's what you're going for. And when you're photographing, wallpaper does help the photographs. It gives it, again, a layer of interest rather than a flat wall. So again, it really is sort of a case by case decision. Again, keep wallpaper minimal, neutral, and strategic. So in staging, like always, the client gets kind of what they want, right? So I sort of like this one bold statement room at the back of a powder room. Always sort of gives interest. I like doing really bold things in powder rooms because we're not in there long, right? They sort of give an impact and an impression of who lives in the space, and then you're sort of out of there. You're not living in it like you would a living room or a bedroom. This is a bedroom that is fully wallpapered and has the drapery that matches the wallpaper. I think it's a cool space, but again, very personal. It's not something that you would want to do for staging. And then murals tend to be more expensive than wallpaper and more expensive to install. So typically they're not done for staging, but in terms of this sort of being a really relaxing, nice, and inviting space, I think it's lovely. Okay, so that is part one of the lecture. So I'm going to stop here and come back, give you guys a break. See you in a minute.